interview is brought to you by Crowd Health. My husband and I recently ditched our health insurance and switched to Crowd Health. It's not health insurance. I like to say it's assurance. If you are unhappy with your health insurance, go to joincrowdhealth.com and use promo code Liz. Former CIA targeter Sarah Adams joins me today. Sarah, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Sarah, I had followed you on X for some time, but I think you came back into my consciousness last week, or maybe the early last week after the attack, when the video of you on the Sean Ryan show from, I think it was 6 months ago, maybe June or July, that video went viral. You predicted exactly what happened. You said that there are radical Islamists that are in our country, essentially sleeper cells embedded in cities and neighborhoods across the United States, and that they're going to wage coordinated terror attacks, these quote unquote lone wolf terror attacks, like we saw in New Orleans, where the guy took a pickup truck and ran it into dozens of people. I mean, he killed 15 people, injured dozens more. And you said that this is going to happen in a coordinated way in 2025. That was 6 or 7 months ago that you made that prediction. It came true on January 1st. And I think for a lot of us, I'm sure I speak for you guys watching the show too, this particular terror attack made us feel more fear even than usual. We always feel sadness and grief when we see the tragedy, of our fellow countrymen being murdered. But this one sparked a lot of fear, I think, based on hearing that this wasn't just a one-off random weird nutcase, but that this was a something that you expected based on things that you know. So I want to hear how you got to making that prediction. Can you tell our audience first what your background is, how you came to be an expert in this area?
Yeah, my background is I was at the CIA for about a decade, mostly working Pakistan, Afghanistan issues to do with terrorists. But then, as most people know, I traveled to Libya, and I was, in Libya for most of 2012. And then actually after my time in Libya, I worked Iranian Quds Force. So it's really interesting. Everybody I worked have all kind of now come together.
Right before we got on air, I think everyone will think this is funny. I asked, do you want me to introduce you as a former CIA targeter? What do you want? What's your official title? And you joked that warlord is your official title, but it doesn't always go over well. I actually think it's funny, first of all, but it is actually kind of accurate because you've been involved in some of the most serious, sober, and dangerous threats, not involved in the threats, involved in countering these threats. So you do know what you were talking about. What led you to that warning in 2024 where you said, listen, this is not just going to happen once. It's not just going to be a one-off. It's not copycats. There's a coordinated effort by these radical Islamists to target us.
Yeah, to make it as short as possible, we've done 3 investigations into high-profile terrorist attacks. So we've been working on this about 9 years. So the Benghazi attacks, the Abu Ghraib attacks, and then the Hamas attack planning, that occurred in 2023. So this is the culmination, as you can imagine, of 3 investigations and about a decade of work. But we really were successful in uncovering this plot because one of the plotters of the homeland attacks in the United States was one of our 2012 Benghazi plotters. He has a long name. It's Abdul Azim Ali Musa bin Ali. He is a Libyan Al-Quada commander, but he's also Haqqani. He's married to one of Sirajuddin Haqqani's family members, and Sirajuddin Haqqani, his second wife is Musa's family member. So he's Al-Qaeda.
Who is that? Who is that family? Sorry to interrupt, but I want to make sure that I understand the connections here.
No worries. Our troops know this well. The Haqqani network was the main group committing the terrorist attacks and the suicide bombers against our troops. So the man I said, Sirajuddin Haqqani, he sent himself over 1,000 terrorists at our troops. So, many who died, many who lost limbs is his fault. Well, now he's the Minister of Interior for Afghanistan.
Okay, so this is like high up stuff. This is not just some depressed dude looking for meaning in the United States who fell down an online rabbit hole and got radicalized. This is a concerted effort. So let me I guess jump ahead just a second and then we can keep untangling this. If we are sitting here in the United States in a situation where there are 1,000 radical Islamist sleeper cells in the United States, what are they waiting for? Are they waiting for some word before they wage their attack?
Yeah, so what we explained is the fact that there's going to be a number of these, as you call them, lone wolf attacks, right? over the course of whatever time Al-Qaeda chose and whatever deal they made with the Islamic State Khorasan province. And the point of that is to shift law enforcement focus onto lone wolves. As you know, that actually takes up a lot of resources, right? You got to look for maybe someone radicalized. It's very difficult. But then you don't spend any time looking into the big plot that Al-Qaeda has planned. So it's a very interesting thing. Now, we don't know yet for sure if the New Orleans attacker is a part of this plot, but it's starting to look that way, right? Because he's an ISIS body. He traveled to Egypt. I don't know if a lot of people know, but the mastermind of Al-Qaeda's U.S. homeland plot is Saif al-Adil. He's an Egyptian.
So what is your analysis then when we see a lone wolf attack and we find out that he traveled to Egypt and last summer, at least on Facebook, so publicly, he pledged allegiance to ISIS? What do you make of that? I guess in the context of this larger plot against the American homeland coming from Al-Qaeda versus ISIS?
So, not knowing for sure if he's connected to that, I look at more as a series of a lot of things that's going to happen this year, right? Because we let a lot of terrorists into the country, and you asked, what are they waiting for? Well, they have a number of plans. So, back in November of 2021, they made the plan for Syria, okay? Then starting in March 2022, they made the Hamas attack plan, right? So it takes time to train terrorists, get things operational, put people in place. So now the homeland attack is operational because everybody's been trained and everyone's been deployed to the United States, if that makes sense. So we're just coming up in the series of a number of attacks planned. And so I think people need to really focus on this because we can help thwart some of this stuff, right? I mean, I know people kind of get see something, say something. We actually stopped doing it, right? We started kind of getting, that's not my business. I'm not interested in that. Or things people just said, oh, that's profiling, right? You can't say anything about it. And they almost kind of shut people up. So we need to get back to where we start looking around, paying attention, get off our phones. We need to keep each other safe.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, the wokeness stuff played into people being afraid of speaking up when they see something because you're worried about being labeled Islamophobic. I mean, you're worried about being canceled online, bullied, you're worried about your employer finding out, but actually that's putting other people in danger. Okay, so I just want to build on everything you're saying. So there's these quote unquote lone wolf terrorists that are in the United States that are radicalized, they're radical Islamists, they pledge allegiance to ISIS or they're under the helm of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda has a homeland plan, meaning a plan to attack the U.S. homeland. These terrorists have been trained and deployed. What do you anticipate these attacks looking like? Are we going to see these quote unquote one-offs like in New Orleans, just randomly and with more frequency? Do they have an October 7th style assault planned? What are you expecting?
So we have both. So we're first going to see the one-offs, and then we're probably going to see at least one U.S. embassy overseas targeted. And then there is a large 9/11 style attack, but it's more like the Hamas attacks or like the Mumbai plot, from 15 years ago. And how the terrorists were trained, at least, is they went through urban warfare training and they went through suicide bomber training. We believe about 10% of the attackers will be suicide bombers, but we also believe the suicide bombings aren't just going to occur on land. They're also going to occur in the air, on airplanes.
Gosh, that is so freaky. That is so freaky. Is it too late to stop this? I mean, I know that there's been a lot of people that have been sounding warnings about, the open borders, allowing all these terrorists to come in and, as I say, the wokeness, meaning people aren't screening for radical views, but is it too late for us to do something, or can we protect ourselves against this and stop it before it happens?
Well, I mean, the way I look at it, right, the plot's operational, so it wasn't thwarted, but we're Americans, right? We can come up with really smart ways to protect ourselves to get ahead of this. It's just you got to get it out there and let law enforcement know, let citizens know, so they can actually step up and kind of be that first response we're going to need. So I think we can do a good job of preventing this, but we all have to work together, and we're having a really hard time, as you know, with everyone being divided, people not trusting what they're hearing, and not even understanding what's going on, right?
So there's the citizen-led aspect, what you're doing, what I'm doing. We're trying to say, like, listen, when you have information, you can use it to lobby your elected official. You can use it to bring it to law enforcement's attention. But what about the government response? Whether this is local government, state government, federal government, what do they need to be doing to be protecting us from this?
Well, they need to elevate and put out some sort of terrorism alerts, right? Because you're not going to get what you need on social media. You need a massive kind of bulletin that goes out so the majority of Americans hear it, right? Then on the state level, once that goes out, you can allocate funding, resources, etc., to law enforcement, right, to get them to where they need to be. For many years, we trained very well to prevent against terrorist attacks. It's just kind of fallen off by the wayside because we haven't had a big attack here in years, right? So we know how to prepare for this. We just got to get everyone back up to speed again.
So theoretically, we have, the incoming Trump administration, and he has his border czar, Tom Homan, who is going to be carrying out these mass deportations. And they know who they're going to deport. They're aware of where these people are and these people's identities and how to find them and how to collect them and how to deport them. Can the same be said for the terrorists who are in our country? Does the government know who they are? Does the government know where they are? And does the government have the capacity to go get them and get rid of them before they harm us if the government so chose to do so?
I do think there's like several hundred on the watch list. They at least know they're here, right? They know who they are. They know what they're capable of. I think those are probably the easiest for them to go after and get them out of the country. The problem is any newly trained attacker, think about that. You have no track record. Nobody has your biometrics. You've never committed any kind of crime. They're the ones more difficult, and you got to look back and, identify them in advance as a terrorist, uncover their networks, find their connections, that type of thing. So that's going to take a lot more investigative work to do it properly.
We have a new sponsor for the Liz Wheeler Show. Masa Chips has joined the Liz Wheeler Show family, so give them a warm welcome. It looks like RFK Jr. is going to get into HHS. Can you believe this is happening? I cannot wait. The question we should be asking is, will he bring back tallow fries? A couple months ago, Michael Knowles was on the show, and he made a wager with me that, yes, RFK Jr. would bring back beef tallow fries at McDonald's. I guess we just have a couple more weeks to wait and see. But for now, I'd like to introduce you to a new sponsor for the show, Masa Chips. They are free of seed oils. Masa actually only has 3 ingredients: organic, nixtamalized corn, grass-fed and finished beef tallow, and Redmond's sea salt. No seed oils, no pesticides, and no fake ingredients or toxins. Grass-fed beef tallow is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet and the premier cooking fat in many cultures for thousands of years. All chips and fries and most fried foods used to be cooked in tallow till the 80s and 90s, when corporations switched to seed oils in order to save costs and profit themselves. And then, of course, they funded studies claiming that it was the healthy thing to do. Well, it wasn't the healthy thing to do. Beef tallow tastes incredible. My husband loves these chips. My father-in-law loves these chips. Masa chips are crunchier, tastier, sturdier than other chips. Like, they won't break if you dip them in guac. So let's maha. Go buy some masa. I encourage you to check out Masa Chips at masachips.com. You can use my promo code Liz Wheeler for a discount. That's masachips.com, promo code Liz Wheeler. Offer good on first-time orders only. Now, do you either know or speculate that many or most of these people in our country, are they U.S. citizens like the New Orleans attacker, or are they foreign nationals who are here either with some kind of green card or residency, student visa, or have illegally crossed our border?
I don't know for the ISIS ones, but for the Al-Quada ones, I know a lot of them were forced to go through training in Afghanistan because a lot of plots over the years got messed up because they weren't trained properly. So I do think a number of them are foreign. I know Al-Qaeda focused on a few nationalities. They focused on Saudis, Kuwaitis, Egyptians, Jordanians, and then kind of like Libyans, Syrians down the line. So they did have some preferential candidates. And then I know that they did not care if they brought people in legally or illegally, but they preferred legally so they could sit and wait and you didn't have to worry about anyone being, suspects because they didn't have the right documentation.
Right. So it sounds to me, and I don't care if this is politically correct or not. I know you guys watching don't care if this is politically correct or not. It sounds like there's profiling that needs to happen if there are people here in our country who are not citizens, who are associated with countries that are hotbeds of terror, like Afghanistan. It sounds like the backgrounds of those individuals, whether or not they have done anything illegal, needs to be investigated to see if they were, in fact, in contact with or trained by terror organizations abroad.
Well, the interesting part is most Afghans say Afghans should go through extreme vetting, right? So the first family I rescued from Afghanistan, there was a young daughter. She was in school to be a doctor and she was in Ramstein and she called her brother in America and he's like, how did you get a phone? And she's like, oh, I cut a deal with one of these army officers. And he's like, what'd you do? And she's like, oh, I'm his interpreter. He's like, why are you his interpreter? Is not all of Ramstein interpreters that we worked with over the years? And she said, no, about 70% of the people here have never had a relationship with the US government. They don't speak any English. And there's actually a lot of men who won't even look me in the eye. They're super extreme. I don't know why the United States is bringing them in, right? That's a young 20-year-old Afghan girl saying that. So the Afghans who worked with us think we should have done vetting and they think we brought in a lot of the wrong people. It's one of their biggest arguments.
Interesting. And it's funny how I mean, I've not heard a story like that except from you. So here in the homeland, we as American citizens, we're going about our lives. We're celebrating our holidays. We're going to sports games with our families. We're going grocery shopping. We're taking our kids to school. What type of venues do you expect to be the targets of these attacks?
The interesting part is they're basing it a little bit off of the Mumbai attacks. And for people who aren't aware of the Mumbai attacks, they happened 15 years ago and the terrorists got to choose in real time if they were going to change the target of their location, if they're going to change like their modus operandi, so how they would do the attack, right? Like a vehicle ramming or a bomb or using their gun, etc. So in the Homeland attack, they've been trained to be able to do this. So the interesting thing is, even if you find out at the last minute the plot is against this location, the terrorists could say, no, I'd rather do this one. So it's really fascinating. So we need to actually just prepare any soft targets, right? As a family, you need to have discussions if something happens. How do we get to a safe place? How do we not panic, right? How do we communicate if the phones aren't working? How do we protect each other if someone got injured? Because even the first responders could be very overwhelmed if this does happen in multiple places. So we're kind of our first line of defense and we need to prepare for that.
What are those signs that people should look for if they're in public? I mean, I know, my husband is former military and he's always very situationally aware. And that's one of our family's like thesis is be situationally aware. That's how you keep yourself safe. That's how you keep, everyone around you safe. But what would be the things that you would say, those are red flags? If you see that, don't ignore that feeling in your gut, that intuition that something's wrong.
Yeah, I think if you see someone and like that hair comes up on the back of your neck or there's something off about them, their face is clenched, they're sweating, because the interesting part is we believe some of the suicide bombers, like the attackers were in Israel, will be on drugs, right? I feel like we know what that looks like. And I feel like in some cities, people got used to it, right? And they're like, oh, whatever. But I think that's something, you see it, you get away from it, right? Anytime something feels off, just move away from the situation, right? There's no reason to take the risk. And that's just any kind of safety, right? If something feels off, go with your gut. And I think that's the best thing you should focus on. And people just have to be alert and pay attention, like your husband's trained to do it, right? Well, we can all be trained to do that and be more situationally aware, and we should focus on that.
That's interesting that you say about drugs. I do remember vaguely, it's ringing a bell in a distant hill, reading that those attackers were on drugs, but that's something, I suppose, if you're thinking about it through a lens of human nature, you would almost have to somehow disassociate yourself from reality in order to commit such a horrific act.
Exactly. And, some of these fighters are fighting to the death. Some are blowing themselves up, right? I mean, no matter how committed to the cause you are, you still have a human element. Drugs can defeat the human element in you.
Yeah. You mentioned air travel before. You said you expect some of the suicide bombers to bomb an airplane. I mean, that's a totally different ballgame, too. I mean, it's awful enough if a suicide bomber detonates himself in the middle of, whatever. I don't even want to suggest a venue, but an airliner, obviously that's the purpose would be to cause the airliner to crash to the ground and kill everyone on board. Do you feel that our air travel security here in the United States, I mean, TSA, kind of a joke. Do you feel that that's adequate to prevent this or no?
In my opinion, we should make it mandatory that everybody in the airport goes through the millimeter wave scanner. That's the one where you put your hands up. Until that's implemented, I don't think our airports are safe right now from the bomb that Al-Quada says they created.
What did they say they created?
They've created one that goes through the regular metal detector. So if you're in TSA pre-check, that
Yeah.
detector, and then they have like put a coating in it so dogs can't alert on the vest. So two pieces of airport security now are off the table if they're being honest about how it works.
Do you think they are being honest?
I believe they're being honest because they have worked on this bomb for about 20 years over time. There was a very famous bomb maker named Ibrahim al-Asiri. He was
Mhm.
based mostly out of Yemen, but he did the underwear bomb that kind of didn't go well, the shoe
I
bomb.
recognize that name.
Yeah, he's the one that I don't know if you remember. We had that huge plot thwarted where they made an invisible bomb and they put it on like UPS flights to come in the U.S. and the Saudis uncovered it. So this is basically just innovations on his bomb and in honor of him.
And so is TSA the US government? It's probably not just the US government. I mean, this is an international threat to a certain extent. I know Al Qaeda is singularly obsessed with us, but are we as a government doing anything to counter that known innovation on their part?
So the really interesting thing is, last December, AQAP, so Al Qaeda's Yemen branch, actually put out a video about this threat, and they even had a whole portion of the video where they taught you how to make an invisible bomb yourself. Okay,
What?
so it was a teaser. Well, the government immediately took it down. TSA put out some weird short alert, like, "Oh yeah." We saw this. It's just aspirational. They never provide the bomb making video to the TSA. I've checked with the federal air marshals. They didn't even know there was a video. They don't have a copy of the video. So even something like that should have been mass disseminated because it came from Al Qaeda and should have been taken serious. It was just kind of like swept under the rug. And now, since last year when the video came out, Al Qaeda's advanced above the bomb they showed you in that video, and now it is inside vests. At that time, it wasn't.
So you're confident that it's not just psychological warfare? It's not just something they're putting out to like cause us all to feel freaked out getting on an airplane?
No, I 100% believe the plot's real for the airlines.
Now, are they going to target anybody else besides the United States, or is this aimed just at us?
The interesting part is the plot is U.S. and Europe, and if you actually look at that video, the AQAP video, they name specific airlines. They have U.S. airlines named, and they do have some European airlines named in the video.
Really? So, who are our, in your opinion, best and most effective allies internationally to counter this?
I would probably say the Brits are maybe the most forward leaning right now in what's going on in Afghanistan. The problem is a lot of people are being fooled by the Taliban and they're falling for the Taliban's narratives, if that makes sense. And they're playing games with diplomacy and thinking about recognizing them. So you kind of need the people who are saying, this is crap. Another government that nobody would think of is, the Egyptians are interestingly kind of ahead of things, right? They're very concerned about what's going on in Syria. So they're likely seeing some of this stuff in Afghanistan. I'd be very interested in them. And then, as I told you, one of the key plotters involved in this is Libyan, right? I know people don't want to hear it, but I'd be really interested in getting General Haftar in and getting his intelligence of what's going on in Afghanistan. We need to start going some different ways at getting this information because the traditional pipelines aren't working because we gave up 99% of our intelligence collection in Afghanistan, so we're almost in the dark.
Have you talked to the Trump transition team about any of this?
Yeah, I've talked to a number of different people in his transition.
And what's been their response?
I mean, it's all been positive. I think people want to do things about the threat. There's multiple pieces to the threat, as you can imagine, right?
Yeah.
There's these 1,000 attackers in country. There's suicide vests coming in because the suicide vests are actually professionally made. So you aren't going to make it yourself at home, if that makes sense. So there's little pieces in play and different people coming in have an interest in different pieces. So hopefully we can get some combined strategy to go after the threat here. And then really, though, what matters, as you know, is going after the mastermind of the plot, right? Because he's going to direct it and say, go.
So do you feel, after those conversations, do you feel confident that they're going to take this threat seriously and take action on it? Or are they just kind of, you're like, yeah, they found it interesting, they were receptive, but like, who knows what they'll do?
I think they're going to take it interest. So here's the problem, okay? If you're a new administration, it doesn't matter who you are, you have an agenda, right?
Right.
Now, if there is this foreign actor or this group and their only goal is to basically throw your agenda all off whack, you got to do something about it, right? So if Al-Qaeda is basically going to make terrorism the focus of this year, right? Trump isn't going to be able to do the other things he needs to get done. So he has to like deal with this threat, push it aside, and then get to the job at hand, right? If he kind of ignores this, it's going to keep being a problem. You see the fear just from New Orleans. You've seen everyone talk about who's come over the border, right? Multiple issues there. You know, Americans are worried, right? That's how he got voted in too. They're like, wow, we have these threats in our communities we've never had before. Our law enforcement aren't trained for these threats. Like Americans, you know, need something from his government to feel safe again.
So what are the first 3 things that he should do when he takes office to address this?
I think number one is you bomb the command and control of the homeland attack. It's based in Afghanistan. You target the terrorist who's masterminding. His name is Saif al-Adil, and then you make some real changes to the security situation at U.S. airports. Those are 3 things I would start with.
And we know where that command and control center is located in Afghanistan?
Yes.
And we know where the mastermind is currently located?
For the most part. It's going to take a little targeting work, but yes, he's in Afghanistan and he can be found.
He can be found. And then changing the security at our airports, what would that entail?
Really, you just make everyone go through the millimeter wave scanner. And I do think we could implement some other technology. I'd like to see thermal imaging. It's a lot safer, and it's something that could be a fail-safe, right? So I think those 2 would be successful.
And we could do that, and it would prevent what did you call it, the secret bomb or the invisible bomb?
Yeah, it should be able to detect the invisible bomb, yes, if you did those 2 things in conjunction.
There you go. First 3 things. Question about the New Orleans attack. And it happened on the same day as a Tesla Cybertruck was detonated by that active duty Green Beret outside of Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas. Do you see any connection between those 2 attacks?
I don't. From the start, I thought the cyber thing was unfortunately a mental health situation with a veteran. We have a lot of that. In my community, we see, as you can imagine, so many suicides. And quickly, right? There'll be some of the best operators in the world, and like 5 days later, they're committing suicide. It's this tragic thing, right? So I do not think the 2 are connected, but because of how it was not clearly, stated to the public right away, New Orleans, or like, this is not a terrorist attack, the way it was communicated has confused the public. So I don't think it's anybody's fault if they think they're connected, or they have questions about it being connected, or they don't trust the information they're getting, right? So I don't say anyone's wrong. I'm just telling you that's how I feel, that the 2 are different situations.
Yeah, well, it's one of the fun things now that X is a free and open forum is people can actually investigate and discuss and ask questions. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're staking your position right here. If you say, like, is there a connection? Well, okay, you can question that and then come to whatever conclusion you want. There's been, going back to the Sean Ryan stuff, he's had some theories. I forget the guy's name, but he had some guest on very, very recently, late last week, who was talking about some anomalies with, I guess, the mechanics of if it was fireworks in the Cybertruck, and the Green Beret would have known due to his explosives training that fireworks weren't going to cause a mass casualty event. So they were speculating that maybe this guy was trying to send a message about some strikes that had happened in 2019 in Afghanistan, which they considered to be war crimes, or, maybe the alien aircraft, drone theory that he was trying to blow the whistle on. What do you make of that? You probably have gotten a million messages and questions saying, like, what is this?
Yeah, I believe he committed suicide. He didn't want to harm anyone, right? That's why it was the fireworks, vice a bomb. It's also why it was in a bulletproof vehicle, right? As most people know, this is a high-end operator, right? This is the best of the best we have in this country, well-trained, highly effective, right? So he made the bomb the way he made it for a reason. Now, I'm not 100% sure on him doing it for some of this whistleblowing stuff. I'm not completely sold on that piece. I think life got tough at the end. He's a veteran. A lot of things pile on top of you at the same time. It was the holidays. We see a lot of bad things happen over the holidays. So I right now am not 100% convinced on the email and that he did this as a whistleblower. I think he might have more done this personal.
Interesting. I watched that whole thing, and I think Sean Ryan's conducting these interviews in good faith. I like the guy. I do think, as you said, I think it's pretty obvious that this guy wasn't trying to conduct a mass casualty event. He was committing suicide. Maybe he did want to send a message. I don't know. The part that I feel like there's not quite enough evidence for me to grab hold of the theory is I don't quite see the evidence that the feds were involved in some way. I know he had said he'd been followed by feds, and there was some theories on X at least that were the feds involved in his death. I don't quite see evidence of that. Do you?
I don't see evidence of that, but people get paranoid about that, right? Like, I get some weird joggers in my neighborhood, and Boone is always like, that's FBI, look at that guy, your whole neighborhood's old people, right? So the funny part is, there's always going to be this fear, someone's tracking my phone, someone's following me, right? And when you start to get some sort of, mental decline, you get paranoid, those type of things. And it could have just been a part of where his mental state was at the time, unfortunately. Yeah. But I have not seen anything he was followed or tracked in some way.
Yeah, and I think ABC came out this week and said that he had been getting mental health help the last year, which means he was unstable. And then his ex-girlfriend also said that he had struggled with depression, with survivor's guilt. So there was mental things going on there. Last question for you. What is, and this is a pretty big question, so what is the one thing that you think that everybody in the United States is missing in regards to America's national security?
I think it's the fact that for 20 years, we had a war, right? And it was overseas. So we stopped all the bad guys overseas. And I wish the U.S. government would have done a little better job. I know things are classified, but letting Americans know we thwarted an attack. Because a lot of Americans don't understand. We've been stopping all these attacks. We've been bombing these camps. We were killing the external operations plotters all those years. Well, it stopped in 2021, right? The only attack really since then that impacted anything is Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. So we stopped bombing the training camps. We have not killed an external operations plotter, right? All the things we were effectively doing are completely over. So that's why now the threat has come to our homeland. We couldn't keep it overseas, and now it's here. And now we have to be ready to deal with it here, unfortunately, because the policy was so bad these last 4 years.
Yeah, and I think part of that, and this is I'm in this group that I'm about to describe. So a lot of us got uncomfortable because the Patriot Act and the surveillance state, the intel communities were abusing their power, and they were weaponizing those powers against us for their own domestic political purposes. And so we said, okay, we're going to take that power away from you. I don't even want to call it the balance, but what is the right solution to that? Because we do want our government to be able to have the intel to take out foreign threats when they're still foreign. We also don't want them to have the power to be a big brother, to surveil us, to censor us, to silence us, to target us, and for us to feel like we're just being creeped on all the time. How is this properly structured?
Yeah, this is a complicated issue, right? So I'm in a good position. I have been targeted by my own government, right? I got one of the Benghazi IRS investigations that all the guys talk about. It happened to us. Yes. So, and I know FISA's been misused plenty. The way I think we should handle it is, right, these are very exquisite programs, but if you compromise that exquisite program, like that should be 20 years in prison minimum, right? We need to prosecute the people misusing these programs. And then if there are problems in the program where it doesn't do what someone said, because you could exaggerate it does something a certain way, but in real time it doesn't do that, then you fix that piece of the program, right? So I do think these things need to be in place, but I think there's better ways to do it, because I do think you're right. I think it's been used to go after rivals, and it has, unfortunately, many times been used against those of us serving our government, and it's not right.
But how would that sounds good, but how would you actually have that oversight so that the exquisite program is used for its purpose, but if it's abused, that person is sent to prison? If it's classified, if this is something that we aren't completely transparent about, which I imagine we couldn't be completely transparent about, otherwise we'd telegraph to the people that we're about to target overseas that we're about to target them. How does that oversight actually happen if you and I personally as American citizens can't have our eyes on that?
I don't know if we need our eyes on the criminal case where you charge someone. I'm not against having a classified case where you charge someone for abusing the program and giving them 20 years in prison, I actually have no problem with that. I don't care, as long as you're ending the misuse of the program, right? The problem now is there's no accountability and oversight, from the American people's side, right? So then you don't trust the program at all. So we have to come to somewhere in the middle, right? Where we can effectively do this surveillance and protect our country, where we're not targeting your own people, and where there are real consequences when you misuse the system. And I know you're alluding to this, and you're right? That oversight's probably not the Department of Justice, because they likely misuse the system. So there might have to be a new system that deals with this, right? Like a counterintelligence. There might have to be some sort of prosecution arm, an investigative arm that handled these type of things, because the politicalization of intelligence has gotten so bad, we might need something aggressive to fix it.
It's a sober question that I think that a lot of our members of Congress are silly people. They're unserious. They're there for their own grandstanding and profiteering. And this is a sober question, which they should be having. They should be the ones that are having to grapple with this threat that you described of Al-Quada infiltrating our country and threatening our people versus government, politicos, bureaucrats, swamp creatures, harnessing the power of government that should be targeting terrorists and instead aiming it at us. This is it's a very serious thought. Do you have any final thoughts before I let you go?
No, I just want people, I know the world is full of misinformation and it's really hard to trust the government, right? But I do think we all need to at least look at information and then prepare ourselves in some way, right? Even if you don't 100% believe the threat reporting, go home and prepare your family, right? Because there could be another incident that happens and you're prepared for that, right? So I just really hope people at least focus on, protecting themselves and their family. And if we all do that, we'll have stronger communities and be more resilient to these things happen.
And I follow you on X. I forget what your handle is, though. You want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, so on X, I'm TPA Sarah, but then over on Instagram, we're Askari Media Group, ASKARI Media Group. And the interesting thing with Instagram is a lot of the terrorist groups have banned it. So we will share plot specifics or more details on Instagram just because we don't have to deal with the terrorist side of thing. So I do think people should look at that because you will find nuances you aren't going to see on our Twitter.
Oh, that's interesting. My producer, Tim, will post both your X account link and your Instagram account for this episode. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Sarah Adams, everyone.
Thank you.
Big news in the world of social media for you. Mark Zuckerberg released this video. He said Facebook is about to change. They're about to become more like X. Take a listen.
Hey, everyone. I want to talk about something important today, because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political, but there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation. These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly. So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system. Second, we're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse. What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far. Third, We're changing how we enforce our policies to reduce the mistakes that account for the vast majority of censorship on our platforms. We're bringing back civic content. For a while, the community asked to see less politics because it was making people stressed. So we stopped recommending these posts. But it feels like we're in a new era now, and we're starting to get feedback that people want to see this content again. So we're going to start phasing this back into Facebook, Instagram, and Threads while working to keep the communities friendly and positive. Fifth, we're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas. As we work to promote free expression, I think that it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there is less concern about the bias of our teams. Finally, we're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more. The US has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there. Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down. China has censored our apps from even working in the country. The only way that we can push back on this global trend is with the support of the US government.
Is this legit? Is he being sincere? There are a lot of people on X who are poo-pooing this, saying, oh, it's Mark Zuckerberg. He's just sucking up to Trump because he doesn't want to be investigated because of his Zuckerbucks thing in the 2020 election, because he coordinated with the FBI to censor the Hunter Biden lap story. Is this legit? Here's why I think this is legit. And I got to tell you, I felt skeptical at first for all those reasons. This is not about me by any stretch, but just full disclosure, I have lost millions of dollars, literally, because of demonetization on Facebook and algorithmic suffocation. So obviously, I felt skeptical at first. They have done me dirty over there. Are they actually going to change? Here's why I think they're going to change. Because this isn't highfalutin language coming from Mark Zuckerberg. He's not just saying, well, we think that we went a little overboard. This is just mistakes and we want to blah, 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 blah. No, he's giving a list of things they're going to do that we'll be able to literally see. I mean, he didn't say when this is going to go into effect. It could be today. It could be tomorrow. It could be after the inauguration. It could be a gradual drip over the course of the next year. I don't know. But we will be able to measure the veracity of what Mark Zuckerberg says, because we'll be able to see, did the fact checks stop? Is political content still stifled? Is your account marked as an account in bad standing if you talk about immigration or the election integrity or transgender ideology? We'll be able to see whether he is following through on what he says. And that gives me hope. I mean, if Mark Zuckerberg is being legit, if he truly changes Facebook and Instagram, and to be honest, I totally forgot that Threads was even a thing, LOL. If he follows through on these promises, then the reality of our political landscape, even the cultural landscape in our country, is going to be changed. If he follows through on this, and I know if, the enormity of this cannot be overstated. Go back just a couple of years. Think about 2020. Think about what Facebook did to the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post URL, you couldn't even share on Facebook. And that censorship changed the outcome of the election, probably. Most of us agree on that. Why? Well, the more information that you can share, the more information that you know, then the less the government can abuse you. And we have two examples of this happening right before our very eyes. One of them is in the UK, the grooming gangs. Pakistani men raping young white British girls. It's one of the most horrific stories that I've ever heard. I've been in the news for a long time. I'm somewhat desensitized to reading bad news. This one, I felt sick to my stomach reading about this. It's just evil. And it was covered up. Like, this is not one or two or five girls, as awful as that would be. This is hundreds, if not thousands of little girls in dozens of towns in the United Kingdom. And it was covered up for woke reasons because they didn't want racial whatever. So it was hidden. It was buried. It was covered up. Those who tried to expose it were censored. Some were even put in prison. Imagine if you'd had a voice on Facebook to expose that. Or right here this week in the United States, think about the January 6th pipe bomber story. For years and years, 4 years now, we weren't allowed to say that the 2020 election was rigged. That's why people were at the Capitol on January 6th to protest the assault on our free and fair elections, which were not fair in 2020. And the government tricked the people that were there. They set up January 6th. They entrapped people in order to demonize Trump supporters so that they could justify censoring us and silencing us and prosecuting us. And so because of that, for years, the mystery of who is the January 6th pipe bomber remained absolutely untouchable. Until this week, we come to find out that the FBI actually narrowed the suspect down to one person. But then suddenly, the FBI stopped their investigation. Why? Who was that person they didn't want to reveal? Why was the FBI engaging in a cover-up? Well, the lead FBI agent lied to Congress. He claimed that data from a major telecom company was corrupted, and that's why the investigation stopped. But the telecom company says no, their data wasn't corrupted. The FBI agent in charge of this investigation lied to Congress. Why? To cover up why the FBI suddenly stopped the investigation. Why do you think it was stopped? The reason that the government has been able to get away with such blatant abuse of power is because our voices have been censored and silenced. We've been choked out. We haven't been able to speak out and expose these wrongdoings. But now, if Mark Zuckerberg is being legit, if he follows through on his promises, if Facebook is committed to free speech, if they stop stifling political content that you actually want to see and have always wanted to see, if they remove the biased fact checkers who were never about facts, there's lying, fraudulent, left-wing ideologues, if Facebook actually lifts terms of service that currently penalize you for speaking reality on immigration and gender, then our world's about to change. There's no way to know yet whether Mark Zuckerberg is sincere in this video. I hear you. I agree with you. They don't call me a skeptic for nothing. But I have hope this time. So let's test it out. Share this. Like it. Comment. Repost to your personal page. Text it. Email it to your friends and family. And pray. Pray that this change is real. Because if it is, then the state of humanity in the United States and all around the world is about to see a new era of glory days. And by the way, that watch that Mark Zuckerberg was wearing, it costs about $900,000.